Some entitled woman actually locked my access road with chains and claimed I was illegally entering land my family has owned for generations. She made the biggest mistake of her existence. After 3 years away, I returned to discover steel barriers and exclusive community signage blocking the route my ancestor constructed in the early 1920s. What really shocked me was discovering 8 expensive estates had appeared throughout my untouched wilderness during my absence. My work boots hitting the gravel path should have triggered nostalgic feelings. Instead, the fresh pine aroma I'd been dreaming about got overwhelmed by someone's expensive fragrance as a woman emerged from her luxury SUV acting like the mountain belonged to her. She had a short blonde haircut, carried organizational materials like weaponry, and displayed an incredibly hostile demeanor. She announced that the recluse had returned, stating this was now exclusive territory and I was trespassing. I maintained my composure while responding that my family cabin stood up the road and we'd held ownership since the 1920s. Her expression could have chilled molten rock. She insisted that was no longer accurate. What this community association tyrant didn't realize was that I possessed more than just that historic cabin. The subsurface mineral claims extended beneath each of her expensive properties. How would you respond if some power-hungry association leader prevented your property access? Share your location in the comments section. I'm sure many of you have similar organizational nightmare experiences that I'm Declan Forrester, though most people call me Deck unless they're attempting legal action against me. I'm in my late 40s and dedicated most of my career to petroleum extraction work across multiple states. The type of employment that permanently marks your hands and damages your spine by middle age. However, it provided income when circumstances became difficult. My ancestor established this wilderness area in the 1920s, securing over 300 acres of pristine mountain territory centered around a hand-constructed timber structure designed to withstand nearly 10 decades of harsh weather. That structure represented more than mere shelter. It embodied our family heritage. The location where multiple generations learned that independence isn't merely a philosophy, but a requirement for survival. Then my mother developed dementia. Suddenly, every dollar I earned went toward premium memory care in the state capital, while I worked extraction sites as she gradually lost recognition of me. The petroleum odor still contaminates my morning beverages, a persistent reminder of my sacrifice to ensure her final years had dignity. The cabin remained vacant, accumulating dust while I accumulated earnings in harsh northern conditions. She died half a year ago, peacefully released from her suffering. With memorial arrangements completed and my mind at ease, I was prepared to return and rediscover my humanity that I should have anticipated complications. The wilderness that welcomed me resembled something from an upscale publication. Where native flowers once flourished, immaculate green surfaces stretched artificially. Chemical fertilizer scents had eliminated the sweet mountain flower fragrances. 8 contemporary glass structures dominated the scenery, each valued beyond what 3 generations of my family had collectively earned. Presiding over this ecological catastrophe, like a bargain-rate antagonist, was Vivian Ashworth. Imagine your most extreme community association nightmare. Add Texas property credentials and sufficient wealth to purchase territory, and you have her. Middle-aged with a razor-sharp haircut and the type of expression suggesting she's evaluating your financial worth while feigning interest. Local gossip indicated she'd arrived 2 years prior through corporate entities, acquired property at remarkable speed like a gambler with advantage, then immediately declared herself monarch of Pine Ridge Estates. Following our roadside encounter, she handed me documentation containing 47 separate infractions for the cabin that predated her ancestors by approximately 5 decades. The violations were absurd. My ancestors' weathered cedar roofing didn't match their aesthetic guidelines. The 1920s storage cellar that sustained my family during economic depression qualified as unauthorized construction, and natural wildflowers violated their approved vegetation specifications. The cumulative total exceeded $73,000 plus daily penalties until achieving compliance. What truly irritated me wasn't merely the extortion disguised as community standards. It was her tone when saying certain types, her expression when mountain breezes carried honest work odors, and subtle criticisms about transient existence and questionable connections. This woman had never performed genuine labor in her pampered existence. Yet somehow I represented the neighborhood problem threatening her precious values. The documentation allowed 30 days to either pay or face property seizure through legal action. 30 days to comply with regulations I never accepted from an organization I never joined regarding land my family possessed before her parents existed. That evening, I drove my aging pickup to the county administration building. Jolene Carpenter was closing up. She'd held her position for decades. She welcomed me warmly while expressing condolences about my mother. When I inquired about the association filings, her demeanor shifted dramatically serious. The development faced considerable political controversy and received approval with unusual speed. The association covenant documents filed 18 months earlier read like authoritarian fantasy. Page after page of legal terminology granting Vivian Ashworth control over everything from mailbox aesthetics to guest frequency. The interesting part, my signature appeared nowhere on those documents. Important information. In Colorado, association covenants require complete agreement from all affected owners to carry legal force. Key point. Your neighbor's signatures don't automatically bind you. Always confirm your property's actual inclusion in legal documentation. Returning home beneath exceptionally clear stars, one question consumed my thoughts. How does a newly formed association claim jurisdiction over a century-old property they cannot legally control? What I didn't yet understand was that my family had left me something far more valuable than merely that historic cabin. 1 week later, I'm appreciating my morning beverage on the cabin deck. Genuine quality coffee, not the terrible liquid served at northern truck stops. When peaceful mountain silence gets destroyed by expensive tire sounds on gravel. 3 vehicles approach like a suburban assault team. Her luxury SUV leads, followed by 2 expensive vehicles containing people who appeared lost en route to exclusive clubs. Their collective fragrances reach me before they exit their vehicles. Apparently, mountain atmosphere isn't sufficiently fresh without adding designer scents. She emerges wearing what resembles safari attire from premium outdoor retailers. Designer footwear so pristine they've clearly never touched actual earth. Behind her come 3 similarly dressed middle-aged individuals clutching organizational materials and cameras like they're recording a disaster zone. She calls out with artificial sweetness that causes discomfort, announcing they're conducting my mandatory architectural compliance examination. I remain seated, enjoying coffee that tastes like liberation. I don't remember extending invitations. She announces that their architectural review committee possesses complete authority for covenant compliance inspections, waving documents like magical instruments. Her committee begins photographing everything: my cabin, my vehicle, my firewood supply, probably my morning appearance if they could magnify sufficiently. The rapid camera sounds mix with their whispered observations about structural deficiencies and aesthetic problems. I stand slowly and explain this as private territory. They weren't invited and certainly lack permission to photograph my residence. She responds that they actually possess that authority, citing specific covenant sections. I interrupt her, noting these are sections of covenants I never signed, documents that don't apply to property never legally included. I'm requesting politely once that they vacate my land. Her complexion transitions from pale to crimson in approximately 3 seconds. She gathers her committee toward their vehicles like a frustrated supervisor, but not before delivering one departing thread about regretting my attitude and having methods for managing troublemakers who disrespect community standards. The following morning, my postal box resembles an explosion of paperwork. 14 separate violation notifications, each bearing official letterhead and signed in her aggressive handwriting. My ancestors' historic outhouse apparently violates contemporary setback requirements. My pickup parked in my own driveway doesn't satisfy their aesthetic standards. Native wildflowers blooming for millennia aren't on their approved list. My personal favorite. Unauthorized outdoor equipment storage. These individuals are penalizing me for chopped wood and a firewood pile. Tools that maintain my family's warmth for generations now apparently threaten their values. Each violation carries $500 penalties with daily increases until corrected. That's when I notice something that makes me smile for the first time all week. The violation photograph metadata shows timestamps from 3 days before their supposed inspection visit. These individuals had been trespassing on my property throughout the week, photographing my residence from multiple angles, planning their bureaucratic assault like some suburban military campaign. Time for my response. Electronics retailers still operate in small mountain communities. I spent the afternoon acquiring a surveillance system, 6 units with night vision, motion detection, and audio recording capabilities. Colorado permits single-party consent recordings, and this is my property, so every word spoken here belongs to me. Within 2 days, I obtained valuable evidence. The cameras captured her and 2 committee members creeping around my property at dawn like amateur infiltrators, taking additional photographs and conducting what resembled strategic planning sessions directly on my land. The audio quality was remarkably clear. Her voice comes through perfectly, discussing the need to document every possible violation and how accumulating more would expedite pressuring me into selling. One committee member suggests claiming environmental violations like septic contamination. She praises this idea, planning to contact county health immediately since emergency contamination concerns always receive immediate response. Important information. Photographing private property from public areas is typically legal, but trespassing to gather evidence constitutes criminal behavior that can invalidate any legal proceedings based on that evidence. Key point. Surveillance cameras prove invaluable when fighting association harassment. Bullies depend on operating secretly, so expose them publicly. Armed with video evidence of their conspiracy, I had options: contact law enforcement, file harassment charges, or engage aggressive legal representation. Instead, I decided to let them continue creating their own problems. 25 years in petroleum extraction teaches patience. When working with potentially lethal equipment, you learn to plan several moves ahead. She was operating on pure emotion and suburban privilege. I was playing strategic games while she was still learning basic moves. Predictably, my phone rings the next morning. It's the county health official explaining he received a complaint about septic violations at my location. He knows my ancestor built everything properly, but regulations require investigation that I invite him up anytime with complete testing equipment, wanting everything officially documented. 3 hours later, he's expressing disbelief at what he's discovering. My septic system is cleaner than most new installations. Whoever filed this complaint was either completely ignorant or deliberately lying that I provide him a storage device loaded with selected surveillance footage highlights, particularly the part where they discuss filing false environmental complaints. As his county vehicle disappears down the mountain trail, I pour another cup of quality coffee and watch storm clouds building over the valley. She thought she was playing aggressively. She had no idea the game had completely changed. 2 days after his visit, I'm splitting firewood behind the cabin when I hear vehicles approaching again. Not the smooth sound of luxury SUVs this time. The aggressive rumble of county trucks mixed with what sounds like news media. 3 official vehicles park in my driveway: county health department, building inspector, and someone with organizational materials introducing himself as a state environmental compliance officer. Behind them, local news crews are establishing cameras like they're anticipating a catastrophe. The health official climbs out looking extremely embarrassed, explaining he received 3 additional complaints yesterday. Anonymous reports about immediate public health hazards and environmental contamination. State regulations require he follow up with the complete hazardous materials team. The building inspector begins photographing my cabin's foundation, explaining someone reported structural instabilities and code violations potentially affecting neighboring properties. Meanwhile, the environmental officer is preparing protective equipment like he's entering a nuclear disaster site, explaining they've received reports of possible groundwater contamination, illegal septic discharge, and improper waste disposal that I can detect the setup immediately. The timing is too perfect, the complaints too coordinated. What really infuriates me is the news crew filming everything, making it appear like my family's century-old property is some toxic waste site, that I maintain a level voice despite wanting to throw someone down the mountain, explaining they're welcome to inspect whatever necessary, but I'd appreciate knowing who filed these complaints. The health official shifts uncomfortably, explaining anonymous tips came through the state hotline. While they're establishing their equipment, I notice something that makes my blood boil. The news reporter is interviewing someone just out of camera range. I glimpse platinum blonde hair and designer footwear. She orchestrated this entire spectacle, complete with media coverage to publicly humiliate me and pressure me into selling. Time for strategic counterintelligence. I approach where the reporter is finishing her interview with her, who's wearing a concerned citizen facade that would deceive nobody familiar with her. I politely interrupt, introducing myself as the property owner and explaining that since they're covering this story, I'd like to share information that might interest their viewers. The reporter, young and eager, probably thinking she's uncovered environmental corruption, responds enthusiastically. I display my phone showing a screenshot from my surveillance cameras, explaining I'd like people to know that the person who just provided that interview has been trespassing on my property for weeks, photographing my residence illegally, and I have video evidence of her discussing filing false reports with county agencies. Her complexion goes white, then red, then somewhere approaching purple, protesting that this constitutes harassment. The reporter suddenly becomes very interested, asking if I'm saying I have documented evidence of the complainant trespassing and discussing false reports. Before I can respond, the health official calls out from behind the cabin requesting I come see something. The hazardous materials team has established their testing equipment around my septic system. The environmental officer is holding some electronic detector that should be indicating contamination. Instead, it's completely silent. The environmental officer, removing his protective mask, explains he's never seen readings this clean. My system isn't just compliant. It's exceeding environmental standards by significant margins. Whoever reported contamination was either grossly misinformed or deliberately lying. The building inspector is equally confused, explaining that in his 15 years of experience, my cabin's foundation is solid construction that would meet contemporary earthquake standards. These reports claimed imminent structural collapse, but this building could probably survive extreme events. The taste of vindication is sweeter than my morning coffee, but I'm not finished. I suggest that if they're interested in actual environmental violations, they might want to test the runoff from those new estates down the valley. I've noticed some unusual discoloration in the creek after heavy rains. Important information. Anonymous complaints to government agencies can be traced through information requests, and false reports to environmental agencies constitute federal crimes with serious penalties. Key point. When facing coordinated harassment through government agencies, document everything and remember that filing false reports is a crime that often carries heavier penalties than the violations they're claiming. While the inspection team packs their equipment, the news reporter corners me for a longer interview. I provide copies of selected surveillance footage, explain the harassment timeline, and suggest she might want to investigate the rapid approval process for the development. She acknowledges this is quite a story and asks about a follow-up piece about association, overreach, and harassment. I respond that I'd be honored, but she might want to verify sources more carefully before appearing with hazardous materials teams as the convoy of official vehicles drives away. I notice her standing by her luxury SUV, frantically talking on her phone. The mountain wind carries fragments of her conversation. Words like damage control, legal options, and this wasn't supposed to happen. The environmental officer stops by my deck before leaving, explaining off the record that I might want to know they've received similar false reports about properties in other states over recent years. Same pattern of anonymous tips, coordinated timing, always targeting people in disputes with certain association management companies. Very interesting indeed. That evening, I activate my laptop and begin researching her background. Our association monarch has left a trail of suspicious property disputes across 3 states, each involving environmental complaints, harassment campaigns, and mysterious property acquisitions at below-market prices. The pieces of a much larger puzzle are assembling, and the picture they're forming is uglier than I imagined. But if she wants to play dirty, she just picked a fight with someone who spent decades working in an industry where careless mistakes can be fatal. She's about to learn what real due diligence looks like. The restraints are officially removed. The next morning, I wake to find my electrical power has been disconnected. Not storm damage or equipment failure. Someone contacted the electric company claiming dangerous electrical violations requiring immediate service disconnection for public safety. The kerosene scent from my emergency lanterns triggers memories of childhood camping trips, except this isn't voluntary. I'm heating coffee over a camp stove when my phone rings. The electric company's automated system informing me that service has been temporarily suspended pending safety inspection and association approval for reconnection. Association approval for electricity on my own property. I'm still processing this level of bureaucratic insanity when a certified letter arrives, hand-delivered by some law firm courier who appears like he'd rather be serving documents to actual criminals. The envelope is thick as a book, printed on letterheads so expensive you can feel the wealth. Inside, 47 pages of legal jargon essentially demanding I pay them hundreds of thousands in damages and compliance fees, or they'll sue me into oblivion. But they're claiming my noncompliance has caused irreparable harm to community values, and my hostile attitude constitutes intentional interference with business relations. The letter provides 72 hours to respond, not to pay, but to respond. The subtext is clear. Engage expensive lawyers or get steamrolled. What makes this performance particularly insulting is that the law firm's address is in the state capital, and according to their website, their senior partner is her husband. These people aren't just corrupt, they're laughably obvious about it. While reading through their legal threats, I noticed something that makes me smile for the first time all morning. The lawsuit claims damages from early this year, but according to county records, I didn't even return to the state until spring. They're claiming half a year of value damage from someone who wasn't even present. Amateur hour indeed. Time for my counter-research phase. I spend the day at the county library. Their internet is faster than my cabin's spotty connection, and I need to dig deep. What I find in public records makes my petroleum workdays look like elementary school for complexity and corruption. She isn't just some suburban tyrant with a control problem. She's been running the same scheme across multiple states for nearly a decade. The pattern is always identical. Buy land cheaply through corporate entities, fast-track development permits through friendly local officials, establish iron-fisted associations with herself in permanent control, systematically harass any existing residents who refuse to join or pay her inflated fees, force them to sell below market value through legal intimidation and bureaucratic warfare, then resell at massive profit. Multiple states, dozens of families forced out, currently under investigation for fraud in one state, federal lawsuits pending in another, and operations closed down by state officials for criminal enterprise activities in yet another. And now my state gets to be her latest hunting ground. But here's where her research team made their mistake. They never bothered checking the mineral rights history on my property. While they focused on surface ownership and association covenants, they missed that my ancestor was smarter than they credited. The original homestead patent didn't just grant surface rights. It included mineral rights, water rights, and something called perpetual access easement for mineral development. Legal language essentially meaning I have the right to access my mineral holdings even if someone else owns the surface. Every single one of those estate foundations sits on top of my mineral rights. Important information. Mineral rights are separate from surface rights and often trump association covenants, local zoning laws, and even some government regulations because they're protected by federal mining law dating back to the 1800s. Key point: when fighting property disputes, always research mineral rights, water rights, and easements. They often provide legal authority that supersedes modern restrictions. I'm still absorbing the implications when my phone buzzes with a text from the health official explaining I should know that he received a call from the state attorney general's office. Someone's been asking questions about environmental complaints in their county, specifically about patterns of false reporting. Interesting timing indeed. That evening, I'm reading by kerosene light when I hear the unmistakable sound of someone attempting stealth on gravel. My surveillance cameras have night vision, but I don't need electronic surveillance to know I've got visitors. Three figures in dark clothing are creeping around my property with what appears to be spray paint containers and a bag of supplies. The gasoline scent hits my nose just as I realize what they're planning. These individuals are about to attempt burning down a cabin built from fire-resistant timber during the wet season on property that's been under electronic surveillance for weeks. I step onto the deck with a flashlight and my grandfather's old rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just ensuring it's visible. I announce it's a beautiful night for a walk. The figures freeze completely. In the flashlight beam, I can distinguish two men and a woman, all wearing ski masks like discount criminals. I explain I'm going to count to 10. Then I'm calling law enforcement. They might want to consider whether whatever they're being paid is worth felony arson charges. They drop their supplies and run like they're on fire themselves, stumbling through darkness toward what sounds like a vehicle parked on the main road. But they left behind a gasoline container, 3 spray paint containers, and a bag containing road flares and what appears to be a timing device. evidence that's about to make her legal problems exponentially worse. That I call the sheriff directly. We'd met during the false health complaints incident, and he seemed like an honest officer who didn't appreciate having his department used for harassment campaigns. I explain I just scared off 3 people who were about to commit arson on my property, and they left behind enough evidence to stock a fireworks stand. That he responds that he'll be right up, instructing me not to touch anything and keep that rifle handy until he arrives. 20 minutes later, he's photographing the abandoned arson supplies while I show him surveillance footage of the attempted break-in. He explains I just gave him enough evidence to arrest someone for attempted arson, conspiracy, and probably criminal enterprise charges if they can prove who hired them. As he's loading the evidence into his patrol car, he stops and looks at me seriously, explaining off the record that I might want to know federal investigators have been asking questions about property fraud schemes in the state. Seems like someone's been running a pattern of harassment and illegal property acquisition that's caught federal attention. The puzzle pieces are falling into place, and the picture they're forming is about to land several people in federal prison. But first, I've got a lawsuit to respond to, and after tonight, I think I've got some very interesting counterclaims to file. 3 days later, I'm sitting in the office of Roxanne Blackwood, a property rights attorney who specializes in cases the large firms won't handle. Her office smells like aged law books and strong coffee, the kind of place where genuine work gets accomplished, not billable hours get padded. She begins by spreading out a stack of documents that appears like it could overwhelm someone, explaining I'm not going to believe what her research team discovered. She slides over a thick folder and explains the first document is a photocopy of my ancestor's original homestead patent stamped with federal seals and signed by officials whose names belong in history books. She explains my ancestor didn't just homestead the property. According to federal records, he filed claims on mineral rights covering far more territory, the entire valley floor plus the surrounding ridges. I'm still processing this when she flips to the next document, explaining that when my family sold off parcels in previous decades, the deeds transferred surface rights only. The mineral rights stayed with the original homestead patent, which means I don't just own my cabin. I own the mineral rights under every single estate in the development. The room goes quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. I'm trying to comprehend the implications when she drops the next revelation. Under federal mining law, mineral rights include reasonable surface access for extraction activities, meaning I have legal authority to access my mineral holdings even if someone else owns the surface. She slides over another document, a geological survey showing the valley sits on top of significant deposits of rare earth elements, the kind used in electronics and renewable energy technology. Based on current market prices, my mineral holdings could be worth anywhere from $50 million to $200 million. I lean back feeling like someone just hit me with a sledgehammer made of good news. I summarize slowly that she's been threatening to steal property that I not only own legally, but that sits on top of mineral rights worth more than her entire development. She confirms that's exactly right. And here's the best part. Every building permit issued for those estates should have required notification of mineral rights holders. That's federal law. She pulls out another folder explaining none of the permits filed for the development included mineral rights notifications, which means every single construction permit was issued illegally. The implications hit me like an avalanche. So their entire development is built on illegally issued permits. She explains it gets better, having pulled the financial records which are public information. She asked me to guess how much money has flowed through that organization in the past 2 years. That I shake my head. She reveals it's millions in association fees and special assessments, but only a fraction shows up in legitimate expenses. The remaining millions disappeared into shell companies owned by board members and family businesses. My jaw drops. She's been embezzling millions. She confirms that's just what they can trace. The real number is probably higher. She leans forward with a serious expression, explaining what I've got here isn't just an association dispute. This is organized fraud, racketeering, and potentially federal crimes involving mail fraud, wire fraud, and violation of federal mining laws. She hands me one final document, a letter with federal investigator letterhead. This morning, she contacted the federal task force that's been investigating property fraud schemes in the region. The agent is very interested in talking to me, as my situation fits a pattern they've been tracking across multiple states. That I stare at the letter trying to process everything. 6 months ago, I was just someone trying to come home and heal from grief. Now I'm sitting on mineral rights worth hundreds of millions, evidence of federal crimes, and the key to bringing down what appears to be a multi-state criminal enterprise. I ask what happens now. She smiles like a predator that's just spotted prey, explaining that now we turn the tables completely. I'm not the defendant in this story anymore. I'm the plaintiff with enough legal firepower to level their entire operation. The taste of justice is sweeter than I expected, but there's still work to do. She outlines the strategy. First, file for an emergency injunction to stop all association activities pending investigation of their legal authority. Second, demand a complete accounting of every dollar that's flowed through their organization. Third, notify every homeowner in the development that their property titles may be invalid due to permit violations. And fourth, let the federal agent know that I'm ready to cooperate fully with the investigation, that I walk out of that office feeling like a different person than the one who entered. The mountain air tastes cleaner, the sun feels warmer, and for the first time in months, I'm not playing defense. She thinks she's been hunting wounded prey. She's about to find out she's been stalking a dangerous animal with legal representation and federal backing. The real fight is just beginning. Walking out, I feel transformed, except instead of superpowers, I'm wearing mineral rights worth more than most small nations' economies. But possessing powerful leverage and knowing how to use them strategically are completely different things. The MY attorney has assembled what she calls a dream team, though it looks more like a support group for lawyers with justice obsessions. There's an environmental attorney who usually defends endangered species, but got interested when he heard about illegal permit violations. A financial crime specialist who left the prosecutor's office because she was tired of negotiated settlements with wealthy criminals. And a former federal agent turned private investigator who specializes in multi-state fraud cases. The environmental attorney pulls out a laptop and starts showing us satellite imagery of the development, explaining environmental violations are extensive: illegal grading, altered natural water flow patterns, several homes built in floodplains without proper permits, and evidence of contaminated construction runoff entering protected watersheds. The financial specialist spreads out documents that look like they came from an accountant's nightmare, explaining the shell company structure is designed to hide asset ownership and facilitate money laundering. Her real estate holdings across multiple states are worth approximately $15 million, all purchased with funds that can't be traced to legitimate income sources. That I'm absorbing all this when my attorney drops the strategic revelation. Here's the approach. Let the federal investigators build their criminal case while we pursue civil remedies. My mineral rights give us the legal authority to challenge every permit, every building, every association action taken without proper notification. We can essentially freeze their entire operation while the criminal investigation proceeds. She pulls out a thick legal document explaining they filed an emergency injunction against all association enforcement activities pending resolution of mineral rights notification violations this morning, with a hearing scheduled for next week. The environmental attorney adds that environmental regulators have opened a formal investigation based on their complaint. If they find violations, which they will, it could result in federal cleanup orders and criminal charges for environmental crimes. Important information. Federal mining law requires notification of mineral rights holders before any surface development, and violation of these requirements can void building permits and require complete environmental impact reassessments. Key point: mineral rights often provide legal authority that trumps local zoning, association covenants, and even state regulations. Always research subsurface rights when fighting property disputes. But the masterpiece comes from the investigator, who's been quietly building what he calls the community intelligence network. He reveals that my neighbor isn't the only original resident who's been keeping detailed records of association harassment. They've got multiple homeowners with documentation going back years, plus several newcomers who realized they were defrauded after buying properties with clouded titles. He slides over a thick binder explaining they have numerous people willing to testify about harassment, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, plus my surveillance footage, financial records, and now federal agency backing. The financial specialist opens another folder, explaining they filed a civil lawsuit this afternoon with criminal enterprise charges against her, her husband, and numerous co-conspirators across multiple states seeking treble damages under racketeering statutes, which means if they win, They're not just looking at criminal charges. They're looking at paying back 3 times every dollar they've stolen, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages. My attorney leans back with the satisfied expression of someone who's about to ruin some very deserving people's entire lives. Explaining conservative estimate puts the judgment around $40 million, complete asset forfeiture, and federal prison sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. The room goes quiet except for the sound of justice grinding its gears. I ask what about the innocent homeowners, because despite everything, I don't want regular families to lose their homes because they trusted the wrong people. The environmental attorney has an answer for that too. Title insurance claims, plus a settlement fund created from seized assets. Every legitimate homeowner gets made whole, properties get proper environmental remediation, and the valley gets permanent conservation protections. The investigator closes his laptop with a decisive snap, outlining the timeline. Emergency injunction hearing next week should freeze all association activities. Federal arrests probably happen within 30 days based on evidence quality. Civil trial starts in 6 months, but most defendants will settle once the criminal charges come down. I look around the room at these 4 people who've decided to help a mountain resident take on organized crime, and I feel something I haven't experienced since my mother died. Hope mixed with the absolute certainty that justice is coming. I ask, when we start destroying these people's lives. My attorney's smile could power a small city, explaining we already have. The taste of mountain air through the office windows carries the scent of pine trees and incoming victory. Somewhere in the state capital, she is probably planning her next harassment campaign, completely unaware that her entire criminal enterprise is about to be dismantled by federal prosecutors and someone whose family has been outsmarting bullies since the early 1920s. This is going to be satisfying. 2 weeks later, I'm watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold when the sound of helicopters breaks the morning silence. Not the occasional medical transport or news aircraft. These are federal vehicles, dark and serious, circling the valley like mechanical vultures. The BY morning, the development looks like a federal crime scene with investigator vehicles, criminal investigation vans, environmental enforcement trucks, and enough federal agents to invade a small territory. The scent of rotor wash mixes with mountain pine as helicopters ferry in evidence recovery teams. That my phone starts buzzing with texts from neighbors expressing shock and asking what I did. The news vans are everywhere, calling it the biggest association fraud case in state history. But the sweetest message comes from the health official explaining that the county commissioner just got arrested in federal custody. The commissioner who fast-tracked all those illegal permits. The investigators' work found a paper trail of bribes, kickbacks, and what federal prosecutors are calling a conspiracy to defraud the government. While I'm watching the federal activity through binoculars, my surveillance cameras pick up something that makes me laugh out loud. Her lawyer husband is trying to sneak files out of their estate's back door to a waiting vehicle. Problem is, federal investigators have the place surrounded, and he's carrying boxes labeled confidential legal files in broad daylight where every federal camera can record his obstruction of justice. Amateur mistakes continue. My phone rings. My attorney calling from what sounds like a command center full of federal agents, explaining I'm not going to believe this. The raid on her residence turned up evidence of fraud schemes in 6 states, not 4. They're talking about a criminal enterprise that's been operating for over a decade. I ask how severe it is. She explains conservative estimate includes over 40 families defrauded, $18 million stolen, and enough criminal violations to keep federal prosecutors busy for the next 5 years. Through my binoculars, I watch federal agents carrying computer drives, boxes of financial records, and what appears to be enough evidence to stock a small library. The sight is more satisfying than my morning coffee, which is saying something, but she's not surrendering quietly. By afternoon, local news is running her crisis management strategy. Interviews from concerned residents discussing government overreach and vindictive neighbors. The narrative she's pushing is that I'm some dangerous recluse who manipulated federal agencies into harassing innocent community leaders. The irony is overwhelming. But her media strategy has one fatal flaw. She doesn't know about the surveillance footage we haven't released yet. That evening, the investigator calls with an update that makes my day complete. He explains that those 3 people who tried to burn down my cabin, one of them just got arrested trying to board a flight with substantial cash and a fake passport. I correctly guess he's cooperating extensively, The investigator explains she hired them through her cousin's security company. Same crew that's been doing intimidation work for her other fraud operations across the region. The pieces keep falling into place like dominoes in an earthquake. The IT gets better. The individual's testimony places her at the center of a conspiracy including arson for hire, witness intimidation, bribery of public officials, and what federal prosecutors are calling domestic terrorism for weaponizing government agencies against private citizens. That night, I'm reading by LED lantern. Still no power, but now by choice rather than harassment, when the sheriff pulls into my driveway with his lights off. He explains quietly that federal marshals are establishing a security perimeter around the valley tonight. The federal agent thinks she might attempt something desperate before they can arrest her associates. I ask what kind of desperate. He explains the kind that makes people do reckless things with explosives. He hands me a radio and a federal contact card with direct line to tactical command, instructing me to call immediately if I see anything unusual. As his patrol car disappears into darkness, I realize what started as a property dispute has become something much more dangerous. When people face life sentences, they sometimes decide they have nothing left to lose. The mountain air tastes different tonight, charged with tension and the metallic scent of approaching storm. My surveillance cameras have night vision, my grandfather's rifle is loaded, and somewhere in the valley below, federal agents are watching over a community that's about to learn how deep corruption can run in small places.